There were 12 of us to begin with, by Ian Gordon. With thanks to our producers, Ashley Lindsay, Robert Daniel Pickard, Wes Sale, and Cameron Seegers. Chapter 2, White Admiral, December 26th, 1989. Brian Gallagher, a warehouse operative from the metropolitan borough of Rotherham, Sheffield, was the first to arrive at Miller's Manor that bitter afternoon of December 26th, 1989. As a matter of fact, his was the only vehicle on the vast driveway as he stepped out into the cold. The engorged, crimson sun hovered ethereally above the horizon to the west, making way for the swollen snow clouds approaching from the east. Gallagher shivered perceptibly, sensing a greater dusting of snow than was promised over the radio earlier that morning on his drive from Fitzwilliam Road. Cautiously, he approached the manor, all the while making minor adjustments to the suffocating tie about his neck. The black suit he'd hired for the occasion was a touch too small for him, but he'd persisted with it on the basis of making a good impression, an impression crucial to his overall objective. And that objective was to overcome, or at least to attempt to overcome, the crippling personal anxieties that had, he felt, led to his being a man of advancing years, living what his few friends would often describe as a pitiable life. He'd agonized over the decision to attend a murder mystery event at Miller's Manor for years, endlessly talking himself out of it at the last minute, or at the very least postponing the act of decision-making until tickets for the event were no longer available. But none of that mattered now, for there he was in his close-fitting suit, face to face with the grand entrance, ready to meet the challenges the event had in store for him. Gallagher had rapped on the door a number of times before taking the decision to try the handle. In doing so, he found that the door was unlocked and proceeded to step inside. Met by the gargantuan hallway, a warm, brightly lit and truly festive interior, he closed the door behind him and listened for signs of activity. "Hello?" he called, in the familiar fashion of one evidently out of their comfort zone. No answer was forthcoming, but he was able to make out the spit and crackle of an open fire coming from a room to his immediate left, and it was in that room, the reception hall, that Gallagher discovered the fireplace and the signpost in the southwest corner, indicating that he had found what he was looking for and that he hadn't accidentally stumbled into another house entirely, which his nervousness and general lack of confidence was often wont to suggest. On the west wall, by a large window of frosted glass, stood a table, upon which were laid a number of substantial crystal-cut glasses, and several decanters filled to the brim with what he suspected to be brandy or whiskey. He counted 12 glasses, and, in his anxiousness, quickly poured himself a generous amount of whatever it was that teased him from the confines of one of the decanters. A quick sip confirmed his musings. Brandy. Further inspection of the room revealed a number of elegant tapestries, each of which bore coats of arms and crests unfamiliar to the warehouse operative, several portraits of dour-faced men in lordly garb, and a distinctive bureau on the north wall, host to an upturned top hat. Gallagher approached the bureau, the brandy sloshing back and forth in the glass, and discovered an envelope lying next to the top hat. On it was written, "To whom it may concern." As the hulking 40-something collected the envelope from the bureau, an unfamiliar voice called to him from across the room. "Hi there," came the greeting of the stranger, in a broad Lancastrian accent. Gallagher, startled, turned on his heel, and was met by the piercing gaze of a young woman, her tall, slender frame enchanting to him. "Hi," he returned, his deep, uncouth tones echoing throughout the room. "Were you the first to arrive?" the girl continued. Gallagher hesitated, his anxiety forcing him to take a sip of the brandy in his hand. "I think so," he finally blurted. "I haven't seen anyone else." The young woman approached him, her eyes drawn to the envelope he was now holding to his chest in an unconscious, defensive manner. "What have you got there?" she quizzed. "Instructions?" Gallagher murmured, looking down at the envelope. "Could be." The warehouse operative immediately handed the envelope to the stranger, compelled to do so by the sweet blue eyes that looked up at him. The girl willingly accepted it, and, without much ado, opened it. She read the contents aloud. 12 strangers, 12 names. There was a moment of silence as she turned the piece of paper over in quest of further directions. "Is that it?" Gallagher asked, his confidence boosted by his ever-increasing blood alcohol content. "Seems so," the girl answered, her gaze turning to the top hat on the bureau. "Is that where you found it?" Gallagher nodded. The young woman approached the top hat and peered inside. "Ah," she muttered, comprehension in her tone. "What is it?" Gallagher queried. "We're supposed to draw names from it," she said, picking up the hat. "What's wrong with our real names?" The girl turned to face him, and as she did so, in walked a third arrival, a lady in her mid-30s, well presented in a two-piece plaid suit. "I was going to knock," she began, "but the door was ajar, and I heard voices." Without hesitation, the girl holding the top hat said, "We're about to draw names. Care to join us?" "Sure," the third arrival said, approaching the girl. Gallagher watched the exchange with some cynicism. When he'd applied to participate in the event, he'd read in the small print that, aside from the host, whose identity as the killer was supposed to be unknown, several of the 12 guests would be, necessarily, stooges. Stooges were employed to ensure that the basic rules were followed, and that, in some instances, the roles of initial murder victims were fulfilled. As the 40-something from Rotherham listened to the new arrivals, he felt sure the pair of them were actors, two stooges, or the host and the stooge, setting the wheels of the game in motion. Their performance was fairly respectable, he thought. He might not have noticed if he'd been introduced to them as part of a larger group, but he'd be sure to keep a close eye on them, moving forward. "I'll draw first, shall I?" the young girl announced, looking to Gallagher and then the third arrival for approval. Each nodded their agreement, and the girl plucked out a spherical scrap of paper before handing the top hat to Gallagher. He too fished out a suitable piece, then handed the hat to the lady in the plaid suit, who did likewise. Eyeballing Gallagher, the young girl said, "You were the first to arrive. Go ahead." And so the warehouse operative unfurled his piece of paper and read aloud the words printed there. "White Admiral." The young girl followed suit and read, "Grey Dagger." The third arrival, a little nonplussed, read hers too. "Longhorn." A heavy silence followed, interrupted only by the final sloshing of brandy as Gallagher, now White Admiral, emptied his glass. The 3 contestants, who had been introduced by code name only, had each partaken in the consumption of brandy, Grey Dagger and Longhorn a full glass behind White Admiral, and had paced up and down the length of the reception hall making small talk in anticipation of further arrivals. As twilight came and went, 3 became 7, and as the grandfather clock in the southeast corner struck 9 p.m., 7 became 11. With each new arrival, a name was plucked from the top hat on the bureau, establishing, in order of appearance, the following additions to the cast of characters. Andrena, a jovial, middle-aged lady with a smile for everybody, her bright and colourful personality a remedy for the timid. Yellow Jacket, an attractive 30-something lady who, as fate would have it, arrived in a bright yellow dress, and who, upon his arrival later that evening, would offer Richard Ike the top hat. Nightcrawler, a tall, dark-haired, bespectacled man in a beige sweater, who would later answer Ike's pounding at the door. Green Drake, a handsome, confident man, whose dynamic character and provocative dress shirt immediately earned him the favour of several fellow guests. Black Garden, a quiet, Fair Isle cardigan-wearing man who would later stand in the shadow of Nightcrawler as Richard Ike was granted admittance to the event. New Forest, a blonde, diminutive lady with a quiet but captivating demeanour, adorned that evening in an elegant, olive-coloured floral dress, bespeaking the name blind luck had offered her. Scarlet Darter, a handsome, mustachioed Eastern European individual, whose brooding, shadowy persona was matched only by the Stygian darkness of the 3-piece suit he wore. False Widow, a strikingly beautiful 40-something, her flowing black dress a sparkling spectacle to behold. And last but not least, the aforementioned Bluebottle, a.k.a. Richard Ike, the unwitting participant in murder at Miller's Manor. White Admiral had studied each new arrival with great interest. He was keen to pursue his theory with regards to Grey Dagger and Longhorn, the pair he had identified as potentially host and stooge. Would any of the other arrivals strike him as suspicious, or would his brandy-fueled intoxication work against him in this respect? As they filed in, one by one, he did indeed find his drunkenness to be problematic in his attempts to size up his competition. But, if nothing else, the drink loosened his tongue. He was able to talk quite openly with his fellow guests, which went a long way in alleviating his apprehension, though his forced small talk wasn't likely to form the basis of a winning strategy in a game of who-done-it. So drunk was White Admiral, in fact, that, following the arrival of Bluebottle a little after 9 p.m., he'd completely missed the moment the second envelope was delivered to the occupants of the reception hall. It was Scarlet Darter, the fellow with the mustache, that had noticed the item on the mantelpiece. He claimed not to have seen who it was that had left it there, but White Admiral, more than a little inebriated by this time, had his suspicions, though he was careful not to voice them. Instead, he chuckled to himself in the fashion of a madman, clinging dazedly to his umpteenth glass of brandy. "You two," he thought to himself, as his glazed eyes bounced from Grey Dagger to Longhorn back and forth. "I'm on to you." Meanwhile, Scarlet Darter had stepped into the middle of the room, and the other guests moved to surround him as he prepared to open the envelope. As had been the case with the first envelope, the same text was printed across the front of it. "To whom it may concern." Eagerly, the mustachioed man opened the envelope, withdrew the card it contained, and read, in an accent tinged with Slavic flavors, "Adjourn to the library." "Where's that, exactly?" was False Widow's immediate response, her long neck the object of White Admiral's furtive glances. Several blank expressions met her gaze, with the exception of Grey Dagger, White Admiral's stooge, who announced that she'd looked in on the library following her arrival earlier that afternoon. "Let the game begin!" This from Green Drake, the self-confessed life and soul of the party, who, on more than one occasion over the preceding hours, had announced his eagerness to get to it. And without further ado, the guests, 12 strong, left the warmth of the reception hall behind and crossed the grand hall eastwards in the direction of the library. At the back of the group, glass of brandy in hand, shuffled the drunken White Admiral, his eyes never leaving Grey Dagger. He chuckled again, feeling mightily pleased with himself. "I'm on to you," he muttered. Thanks for listening today, ladies and gents. Be sure to join us again tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for the next part of There Were 12 of Us to Begin With. And until then...